Anais R. writes, how can we memorize verbs and moods, such as the conditional, imperative, indicative, interrogative, and subjunctive? Hi, this is Thomas with Cozy Grammar, speaking to you from in front of Marie's Cozy Beach Cottage in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I am here on a windy day. In front of me is the body of water called Discovery Passage. You might be able to see some of the birds, some of the seagulls being reflected in the windows of Marie's Beach Cottage. And we are in the middle of one of our Ask Cozy Grammar sessions. These are live sessions that we hold via Zoom for our current students. And then we record the answers so that we can share the answers on our social media channels. I think that this is a great question, Anais, because it goes straight to the heart of why studying grammar can be so intimidating. Just look at these words: conditional, imperative, indicative, interrogative, subjunctive. How's that for intimidating? And then to think of memorizing all of the different verbs and moods specified by these terms. No wonder most students finally throw up their hands and say, that's enough grammar for me. So rather than continue this process of overwhelming you, let's look at some simple principles that can help in the process of learning things like verbs and moods. The first principle is this: always connect the concepts you're trying to learn to context, to the context of everyday life. For example, in the very first lesson of the basic Cozy Grammar course, Marie actually introduces 4 kinds of sentences, 4 moods, using the beach cottage behind me. She opens the course by saying, won't you come into the house? Which is an example of an interrogative sentence, a verb in the interrogative mood, meaning just a question. Then she says, come into the house, which is an example of the imperative or the command. Then says, we are in the house, a statement of indicative or assertive. And what a cozy house, which is an exclamatory sentence. So these are 4 examples, and he takes these examples, and by placing them in the context of, in this case, her cozy beach cottage, then we get to see how these verbs act and interact in real life. The more closely we can tie the use of language to its actual context in real life, the more easy it is to memorize all of it. So that's my first suggestion, or my first principle that I share. The second one is that sometimes there are irregular verbs that can be difficult to memorize, especially if English is your second or third or fourth or whatever language. For example, just look at the very basic verb of existence, to be. Now notice how the other forms of the verb is, am, are, was, were, been, being don't actually look anything like to be, or a little bit in case of be, been, and being, but is, was, were. So here's a trick. When you're learning verbs, whether they're very common verbs or whether they're more unusual and irregular verbs, don't try to memorize the verbs on their own as in a chart. Instead, try writing a very short story that uses all those different forms in the context of a sentence, or in the context, maybe one sentence for each form of the verb. Then memorize the story. That way you're going to memorize the usage of those verbs. And you can see from that usage whether you're talking about, for example, an indicative or an interrogative or an exclamatory sentence. We remember stories much more easily than we remember charts. And third, use all of your senses. After you've looked at words in the context of your life, after you put words back into the context of sentences, make sure you're also listening to words in the context of sentences. Listen to good speeches. Listen to stories read out loud. Watch plays and movies. Put yourself in the context of good writing and good speech. Read out loud. Listen, and that context will be teaching you far more about the language than you may realize at the time. So that when you come to these more technical matters of the different verbs and moods, those things will already have been imbued into your experience, imbibed, if you will. And then the process of memorizing will be far simpler and far more enjoyable. So that's a few suggestions, a few principles to follow on memorizing verbs and moods, such as conditional, imperative, interrogative, indicative, and subjunctive. So, nice. I hope that that helps answer your question, at least to some extent. Please feel to write back if you have any further questions, and all good wishes to you.